It seems, however, that a certain difficulty against the aforesaid arises from certain words of Augustine, which must be carefully examined. For he says in Book 9 of the Trinity, "Just as the mind gathers the information of corporeal things through the senses of the body, so it gathers information of incorporeal things through itself. Therefore it also knows itself through itself, since it is incorporeal. For it appears from these words that our mind understands itself by itself, and in understanding itself, understands separate substances, which is contrary to what has been shown. We must therefore inquire how our soul understands itself by itself. But it is impossible to say that he understands by himself what he is. For through this, the cognitive power becomes actually knowing, because that which is known is in it. And if indeed he is in it in power, he knows in power. But if in act, he knows in act. But if in the middle way, he knows by habit. But the soul itself is always present to itself in actuality, and never only in potentiality or habit. If therefore the soul knows what it is through itself, it will always actually understand what it is about itself, which is obviously false. Still, if the soul knows by itself what it is, but every man has a soul, therefore every man knows what the soul is, which is obviously false. Further, the knowledge that comes about through something naturally imparted to us is natural, like undemonstrable principles which are known by the light of the agent's intellect. If therefore we know of the soul what is through the soul itself, this will naturally be known. But in these things which are naturally known, no one can err, for no one errs in the knowledge of indemonstrable principles. Therefore no one would be mistaken about what the soul is, if the soul knew this by itself. This is evidently false, since many have thought that the soul is this or that body, and some are number or harmony. Therefore the soul does not by itself know what it is. Further, in every order, that which exists by itself is prior to that which exists through another, and is its principle. Therefore, what is known by itself is first known to all things that are known through something else, and is the principle of knowing them, as first propositions by conclusions. If, therefore, the soul knows by itself what it is, this will be known by itself, and consequently the first known, and the principle of knowing other things. Now, this is evidently false. For what the soul is not supposed in science to be known, but is proposed to be sought from others. Therefore the soul does not know of itself what it is by itself. It is clear that even Augustine himself did not want this. For he says in the 10th book of De Trinitate, that when the soul seeks knowledge of itself, it does not seek to perceive itself as if it were absent, but it seeks to discern itself as present, not that it may know itself as if it did not know, but that he may distinguish from what he knows the other. From this he gives us to understand that the soul by itself knows itself as present, not as distinct from others. Hence also in this he says that some erred, because they did not distinguish the soul from those things which are different from it. Now by the fact that it is known about a thing what it is, the thing is known as it is distinguished from other things, whence also definition, which signifies what a thing is, distinguishes what is defined from all others. Therefore, Augustine did not want the soul to know what it is by itself. But Aristotle did not want this either, for he says in chapter 3 of the soul that the possible intellect understands itself as something else, for he understands himself through an intelligible species, by which he is actually in the genus of intelligibles. For considered in itself, it is only in the potential to be intelligible. But nothing is known according to what it is in potential, but according to what it actually is. Hence, separate substances, whose substances are as something actually being in the genus of intelligibles, understand of themselves what they are by means of their substances. But our possible intellect is through an intelligible species, through which it actually understands. Wherefore also Aristotle, in 3 De Anima, demonstrates the nature of the possible intellect to understand from itself, namely, that it is unmixed and incorruptible, as is clear from the foregoing. Thus then, according to Augustine's intention, our mind knows itself through itself insofar as it knows of itself what it is. For from this very fact that he perceives himself to act, he perceives himself to be, but he acts by himself, whence he knows of himself what he is. So too the soul, knowing itself, knows that they are separate substances, but not what they are, which is to understand their substances. For when we know of separate substances that certain substances are intellectual, either by demonstration or by faith, we could not receive this knowledge in any way, unless our soul knew of itself what is an intellectual being. Hence also the knowledge of the understanding of the soul must be used as a principle for all that we know of separate substances. But it is not necessary that, if by means of speculative sciences we can come to know what is of the soul, that we should be able to come to know what is of separate substances by such sciences. For our understanding, by which we come to know what is of our soul, is much removed from the intelligence of a separate substance. However, by knowing what our soul is, it is possible to arrive at a knowledge of some remote kind of separate substances, which is not to understand their substances, but just as we know of the soul that it exists by itself, inasmuch as we perceive its acts, but what it is, we inquire from acts and objects through the principles of speculative science. So also about those things which are in our soul, namely powers and habits, we indeed know that they are, inasmuch as we perceive acts. What they really are, we find from the quality of their actions.